What happens when a prince who claims to champion mental health meets a presenter who refuses to hold back her opinions? Well, you're about to witness one of the most explosive television moments in recent memory, where royal protocol went completely out the window and the gloves came off in spectacular fashion. Before we dive into this incredible clash, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think about celebrities using their platforms to discuss personal issues. The atmosphere in the Loose Women studio was already charged with anticipation. Prince Harry had agreed to appear on the show to discuss his latest charitable initiative. But what nobody expected was how quickly things would spiral into television gold. As he settled into the infamous purple chair, flanked by the panel of presenters, there was an unusual tension in the air that even the studio audience could feel. Denise Welch, known for her nonsense approach and willingness to ask the difficult questions, was positioned directly across from Harry. Her reputation for getting under the skin of her guests was well established, and today would prove to be no exception. The other panelists seemed almost secondary as the dynamic between these two strong personalities began to dominate the space. Ruth Langsford attempted to ease into the interview with some gentle questions about Harry's upcoming projects, but it was clear that Denise had other plans. She sat forward in her chair, her eyes never leaving the prince, waiting for her moment to strike. The pleasantries were brief and superficial, with Harry giving his standard media-trained responses about service, family, and making a difference. Then Denise made her move. Without warning, she cut through the diplomatic chatter with surgical precision. "Harry, you've spent years talking about privacy and the intrusion of the media. Yet here you are on television again, sharing intimate details of your life. Don't you think there's a contradiction there?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and you could feel the entire studio hold its breath. Harry's smile faltered for just a moment before he attempted to regain his composure. "I think there's a difference between sharing your story on your own terms and having it twisted by tabloids," he replied, his voice carrying a slight edge that hadn't been there moments before. But Denise wasn't finished, not by a long shot. "On your own terms," she pressed, leaning forward with the instinct of a seasoned interviewer who had just caught the scent of blood in the water. "You've written books, done interviews, made documentaries, appeared on podcasts. At what point does sharing your story become exploiting your story?" The question was delivered with such directness that even the other panelists shifted uncomfortably. In their seats, the prince's media training was being put to the ultimate test. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and his hands, which had been relaxed on his lap, now gripped the arms of his chair. "I think you're mischaracterizing my intentions, Denise. Everything I've done has been about helping others who might be going through similar struggles." His voice was measured, but there was steel beneath the diplomatic veneer. Denise wasn't backing down. If anything, she seemed energized by his defensive response. "Similar struggles, Harry, you're a multimillionaire. Prince living in a mansion in California. How exactly do your struggles relate to a single mother in Manchester trying to pay her heating bill?" The question was brutal in its simplicity, and it cut right to the heart of the disconnect that many people felt about celebrity activism. The studio fell silent, except for the barely audible hum of the cameras. Harry's composure was beginning to crack, and you could see the internal battle playing out across his face. Years of royal training were telling him to remain diplomatic, but his human instincts were screaming at him to fight back. The other panelists looked like deer caught in headlights, unsure whether to intervene or let this car crash continue. To unfold, "I think that's an incredibly narrow view," Harry finally responded, his voice rising slightly above its previous measured tone. "Mental health doesn't discriminate based on bank balance or postcode. Pain is pain, regardless of your circumstances." But even as he said it, you could tell he knew he was walking into another trap that Denise had expertly laid. She pounced immediately. "So you're saying your pain, living in luxury with every comfort imaginable, is the same as someone who can't afford therapy or doesn't have access to the support systems you've had your entire life?" Her voice carried the weight of genuine indignation. Not just television theatrics. This wasn't manufactured drama. This was real tension building to a breaking point. Harry's eyes flashed with something dangerous. The diplomatic mask was slipping, and underneath was a man who had clearly had enough of being questioned and criticized at every turn. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice now carrying an unmistakable edge of royal authority that seemed to surprise even him. The other panelists exchanged glances, clearly recognizing that this interview had moved far beyond their comfort zone. Ruth Langsford made a weak attempt to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "Perhaps we could talk about the positive impact of your charity work," she suggested hopefully, but both Harry and Denise ignored her completely. Their focus was entirely on each other now. Like two prize-fighters who had finally dropped the pretense of a friendly sparring match, the studio audience was completely silent, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't going according to anyone's script, and that made it absolutely compelling television. Denise leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smile, like a chess player who had just made a devastating move. "I know exactly what I'm talking about. Harry, I know what it's like to struggle with mental health without a team of publicists, therapists, and media consultants smoothing the way. I know what it's like to face criticism without being able to retreat to a multi-million-pound estate." Her words were precision-guided missiles, each one designed to hit exactly where it would hurt most. The prince was visibly struggling to maintain his composure now. His face had flushed slightly, and his hands were clenched so tightly that his knuckles had gone white. When he spoke again, his voice carried a tremor of barely controlled anger that sent a chill through the studio. "You want to talk about struggle, Denise?" Harry's voice cut through the studio like a blade, all pretense of royal diplomacy finally abandoned. "You think because I have money that somehow invalidates everything I've been through? You think losing my mother at 12 years old doesn't count because I lived in a palace while I grieved?" The raw emotion in his voice was shocking, and you could see the other panelists recoil as if they'd been physically struck. Denise didn't flinch. If anything, she seemed to sense that she had finally broken through the carefully constructed media persona to reach the real person underneath. Of course, that was traumatic, Harry. Nobody's disputing that. But what I am questioning is whether constantly revisiting that trauma in public, monetizing it through books and interviews, is actually helping anyone or just helping your bank balance. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Harry's face went through a series of expressions: shock, hurt, and then something much darker. When he spoke again, his voice was dangerously quiet. "How dare you suggest that I would profit from my mother's death? How dare you sit there and make accusations about my motivations when you don't know the first thing about what I've been through?" "I know what you've told us you've been through," Denise shot back without missing a beat. "And you've told us repeatedly, in multiple formats, for considerable sums of money. At some point, Harry, people start to wonder if you're sharing to heal or sharing to profit." Her words were like gasoline on a fire. And you could practically see the moment when Harry's famous temper finally snapped. He leaned forward in his chair, his eyes blazing with an intensity that made several audience members visibly uncomfortable. "You think this is easy for me? You think I enjoy having to justify my existence to people like you every single day? I never asked for any of this. I was born into it, and I've spent my entire adult life trying to make something positive out of the hand I was dealt. And that's admirable," Denise replied, her voice steady despite the palpable tension. "But what's not admirable is constantly playing the victim while simultaneously leveraging that victim status for personal gain. You can't have it both ways, Harry. You can't claim to want privacy while courting publicity at every turn." The other panelists were now looking genuinely alarmed. Ruth Langsford made another attempt to intervene. "Perhaps we should take a quick break," she suggested desperately. But both Harry and Denise were too locked in their battle to pay any attention to her. "Personal gain?" Harry's voice was rising now, his composure completely shattered. "Everything I do is about service. Everything I do is about trying to help other people avoid the pain that I went through. If you can't see that, then you're either willfully blind or deliberately obtuse." Denise's eyes narrowed at the insult. "Don't you dare question my intelligence, Harry. I've been working in this industry longer than you've been an adult, and I've seen plenty of people who confuse self-promotion with public service. The difference is that most of them don't have a royal title to hide behind when they're called out on it." That was the moment when everything changed. The mention of his royal title seemed to flip a switch in Harry's mind, and when he spoke, again his voice carried an authority and arrogance that shocked everyone in the studio. "Hide behind? I gave up my royal duties. I walked away from everything I was born into because I wanted to forge my own path. And now you sit there and criticize me for doing exactly that? You walked away from the duties but kept the title. Denise pointed out with surgical precision. You walked away from the responsibilities but kept the benefits. You can't divorce yourself from the institution when it's convenient and then use your royal connection when it serves your purposes. The accusation clearly hit home because Harry's response was immediate and explosive. I kept the title because it's who I am. It's not something I can just switch off like a light bulb. And if using that platform helps me reach more people and do more good in the world, then I'm going to use it. That's called being effective, not hypocritical. Is it? Denise challenged, clearly enjoying having the prince on the defensive. Or is it called having your cake and eating it too? You want all the benefits of being royal without any of the constraints. You want all the attention and sympathy without any of the scrutiny. That's not how the real world works, Harry. The prince was now visibly shaking with anger. His voice, when it came, was barely controlled. The real world, you want to talk. About the real world? The real world is where my wife was driven to the point of considering suicide by the very media that you're defending right now. The real world is where my children have to grow up knowing that there are people out there who hate them simply because of who their father is. For the first time in the interview, Denise's expression softened slightly, but she didn't back down. Nobody wants to see anyone driven to that point, Harry, but you can't blame the entire media for the actions of a few bad actors, and you certainly can't use your family's pain as a shield against legitimate criticism of your choices. Legitimate criticism, Harry's voice cracked with emotion and fury. You call this legitimate? You're not criticizing my choices, you're attacking my character. You're questioning my motives. You're suggesting that I'm somehow exploiting my own trauma for money. If that's your idea of legitimate journalism, then the industry is in worse shape than I thought. The studio had gone completely silent except for the sound of Harry's heavy breathing. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, unsure whether they should keep rolling or cut away from what was becoming an increasingly uncomfortable spectacle. Denise, however, seemed energized by the confrontation. I'm asking the questions that millions of people are thinking but are too polite to ask, she said firmly. That's what journalism is supposed to be about. It's not supposed to be a comfortable experience for the person being interviewed. If you can't handle difficult questions about your choices, then maybe you shouldn't be putting yourself in the public eye. That was apparently the final straw. Harry stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the studio floor. The sudden movement caused several people to jump, and you could see security personnel at the edge of the set tense up, unsure what was about to happen. I don't have to sit here and listen to this, Harry said, his voice now cold and controlled, in a way that was somehow more frightening than his earlier anger. I came here to talk about helping people, about making a positive difference in the world. Instead, you've turned this into a character assassination. This isn't journalism, Denise. This is tabloid sensationalism dressed up as a legitimate inquiry. Denise remained seated, but her posture was defiant. If you can't distinguish between legitimate questions and character assassination, then perhaps you need to examine why you're so defensive about your choices. The truth doesn't need to be defended this aggressively, Harry. It can stand on its own merit. The prince's hands were trembling now. Whether from anger or adrenaline was impossible to tell. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of finality. That made it clear this interview was about to end, one way or another. You know what, Denise? Harry's voice was ice-cold now, every word dripping with contempt. You're absolutely right about one thing. The truth can stand on its own merit. And the truth is that you're a bitter, frustrated presenter who's never achieved anything close to the impact that I have. So you sit here tearing down people who are actually trying to make a difference in the world. The personal attack landed like a bomb in the studio. Gasps could be heard from the audience, and the other panelists looked absolutely horrified. Denise's face flushed red, but her voice remained steady when she responded. There it is, the real Prince Harry. When the questions get too difficult, when someone doesn't bow and scrape and treat you like royalty, the mask comes off, and we see what you really think of the little people. Little people, Harry laughed, but there was no humor in it whatsoever. You think you're little people. You think you're some sort of champion of the working class? You're a millionaire television presenter who makes a living out of gossiping and stirring up controversy. Don't pretend you're speaking for anyone but yourself and your own ego. Ruth Langsford was now frantically gesturing to the production team off camera, clearly desperate to regain control of the situation. "Harry, Denise, please, let's just take a moment to calm down," she pleaded, but both combatants were too far gone to listen to reason. "My ego." Denise stood up now too, matching Harry's aggressive posture. "At least I earned my position through talent and hard work, not through an accident of birth. At least when I fail, I don't have a team of 6 telling me how wonderful I am. At least I live in the real world where actions have consequences." Harry's face, contorted with rage at the dismissal of his achievements, earned your position. You're a washed-up soap opera actress who lucked into a presenting job. Don't lecture me about earning anything when you've spent your entire career riding on the coattails of more talented people. The insult was so personal and vicious that several people in the studio audibly gasped. Denise's composure finally cracked, and when she spoke again, her voice was shaking with fury. "How dare you come into my workplace and speak to me like that? Who do you think you are?" "I know exactly who I am," Harry shot back, his voice now loud enough to echo around the studio. "I'm someone who's actually trying to change the world. While you sit here picking apart people who are doing the work you're too scared or too lazy to do yourself. I'm someone who's had more impact in the last 5 years than you'll have in your entire pathetic career." That was the moment when everything exploded. Denise took a step toward Harry, her face blazing with anger. "You arrogant, entitled brat. You think because you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth that gives you the right to come here and insult me. You think your money and your title make you better than everyone else. Better than you." "Absolutely," Harry replied without hesitation, his voice dripping with aristocratic disdain. "I've served my country in the military. I've raised millions for charity. I've used my platform to highlight important causes. What have you done, except gossip and complain?" The confrontation had now completely spiraled out of control. Other panelists were standing up, trying to physically position themselves between Harry and Denise. Security personnel were moving closer to the set, clearly preparing to intervene. The studio audience was buzzing with shocked conversation, and camera operators were frantically trying to capture every moment of the chaos. "What have I done?" Denise was now shouting. "All pretense of television professionalism abandoned. I've worked every day of my adult life. I've raised children while building a career. I've dealt with mental health issues without a team of experts and unlimited resources. I've earned every single thing I have." "You've earned a reputation as a troublemaker and a bully," Harry fired back, his voice cutting through her words like a knife. "You've built your career on attacking people and stirring up drama. You're everything that's wrong with modern media, and frankly, I'm embarrassed that I agreed to waste my time talking to you." Ruth Langsford was now desperately trying to restore order. "This interview is over," she announced loudly, but neither Harry nor Denise was paying any attention to her. They were locked in their verbal deathmatch, both determined to land the final devastating blow, embarrassed. Denise laughed. "Harshly, you should be embarrassed by your behavior today. You should be embarrassed by the way you've spoken to me and to everyone else who's dared to question your precious victimhood narrative. This is exactly why people are getting sick of you, Harry. This arrogance, this entitlement, this belief that you're above criticism." Harry's response was swift and brutal. "People are getting sick of me. Have you seen your ratings lately, Denise? Have you noticed how irrelevant you've become? At least when people get sick of me, I can retreat to my multi-million-pound estate. When they get sick of you, you'll be forgotten completely." The personal nature of the attacks had crossed every possible line of professional behavior. Production staff were now on the set, clearly preparing to escort Harry away from the studio. But he wasn't finished yet. He had one final devastating salvo to deliver. "You want to know the real truth, Denise? The real truth is that you're jealous. You're jealous that I was born into a life you could never achieve through your own efforts. You're jealous that I have a platform you could never earn. And you're especially jealous that even after walking away from everything, I'm still more relevant and more influential than you'll ever be." Denise's face went white with rage. "Get him out of here," she said to the production staff, her voice deadly quiet. "Get this spoiled, pathetic excuse for a man out of my studio before I say something I'll really regret." Security personnel were now flanking Harry, clearly preparing to escort him from the premises. But the prince wasn't going quietly, as he was guided toward the exit. He turned back for one final parting shot that would become the most quoted moment of the entire confrontation. "You'll regret this, Denise. You'll regret attacking someone who is trying to do good in the world just because it made for good television. And when you're lying awake tonight, thinking about how you've embarrassed yourself on national television, remember that you chose this. You chose to be petty and small instead of having a meaningful conversation." As Harry was escorted off the set, Denise called after him with venom in her voice. "The only thing I'll regret is giving you a platform to show the world what you really are underneath all that fake compassion and manufactured victimhood." The studio fell into stunned silence as Harry disappeared through the exit, leaving behind a scene of absolute chaos. Ruth Langsford was frantically trying to restore some semblance of order. The other panelists looked shell-shocked, and Denise was standing in the middle of it all, still trembling with rage, but also clearly processing what had just happened. The aftermath was immediate and brutal. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation were spreading across social media like wildfire. The moment when Harry called Denise a bitter, frustrated presenter was being shared thousands of times. The moment when she called him an arrogant, entitled brat was trending worldwide. The television industry had just witnessed one of the most explosive interviews in recent memory, and everyone involved knew that there would be consequences. But in that moment, as the cameras finally stopped rolling and the studio slowly began to return to some semblance of normalcy, one thing was crystal clear: this wasn't just a clash between a prince and a presenter. This was a collision between two completely different worldviews, two different approaches to fame and responsibility, and to people who had absolutely no respect for each other whatsoever. Interview that was supposed to be about charity and positive change had instead become a masterclass in how quickly things can spiral out of control when two strong personalities refuse to back down. It was television gold, but at what cost? That question would be debated for weeks to come. But there was no doubt about one thing. Prince Harry had just been kicked off Loose Women in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. And neither he nor Denise Welch would ever forget this brutal clash. What did you think about this explosive confrontation? Was Denise right to push Harry so hard, or did she cross the line? And was Harry justified in his angry response? Or did his royal entitlement show through? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible celebrity stories like this one.